In September 1986, Apple released a computer that was, by design, a contradiction. It carried the name of the machine that built the company, and the technology of the machine that was supposed to replace it. The Apple IIgs was fast, colorful, and capable of things no Apple II had ever done. It was also, almost from the day it shipped, a computer without a clear future. This is the story of a machine caught between two eras of Apple, and what happens when a company builds something brilliant it isn't sure it wants to succeed. By 1985, Apple was a company with a split personality. The Apple II, first released in 1977, was still its financial backbone, filling classrooms across the United States and sitting on desks in homes and small businesses. Millions had been sold, and the second's open architecture and mature software library made it a dependable earner year after year. Then, in January 1984, Apple introduced the Macintosh, with its graphical interface and mouse, and framed it as the company's vision of the future. Steve Jobs championed the Mac division and, by most accounts, showed little patience for the Apple II side of the business, even though II sales were what kept Apple profitable while the Mac struggled to find its footing. Engineers on the Apple II team often felt treated as second-class citizens inside their own company, protecting a product line that funded the very division that seemed to look down on it. By the mid-1980s, the original Apple II architecture, built around the 8-bit 6502 processor, was starting to show its age. New machines like Commodore's Amiga and Atari's ST, both released in 1985, offered 16-bit processing, richer color graphics, and better sound, aimed squarely at the same home users and hobbyists who had grown up on Apple IIs. Apple's engineers, including longtime Apple II designer Rod Holt, and a team that pushed the project forward largely on their own initiative, argued that the platform needed a serious upgrade or it would be left behind. The goal was to build a machine that kept every existing Apple II program and peripheral working, while adding 16-bit power, better graphics, and better sound. Something that would let the Apple II line compete with the new wave of multimedia-focused home computers without abandoning its enormous installed base. The result was built around the Western Design Center's 65C816 processor, a 16-bit chip designed to run in an 8-bit emulation mode, so that it could execute virtually all existing Apple II software without modification, while also running in a native mode that unlocked far more memory and processing power. It could address up to 8 megabytes of RAM, a vast leap from the Apple II's original 64 kilobytes. For sound, Apple turned to Ensoniq, using a variant of their digital synthesizer chip to give the IIgs 32 independently controllable audio oscillators, a capability closer to a music workstation than a typical home computer of its time. Graphics improved dramatically too, with new modes offering a palette of 4,096 colors, far beyond the original Apple II's 6. Tying it together was GS/OS, a new graphical operating system with a mouse-driven desktop clearly inspired by the Macintosh, giving longtime Apple II users their first taste of a Mac-like interface without leaving their existing software behind. When the IIgs launched in September 1986 at a base price around $999, the Apple II community responded with real enthusiasm. Magazines like InfoWorld and A+, covered it as proof that the platform still had a future, and existing Apple II owners appreciated that their old software, and often their old peripheral cards, still worked. Reviewers frequently set it against the Amiga and Atari ST, and the comparisons were mixed. The IIgs's sound chip impressed almost everyone, and its backward compatibility was unmatched by either rival. But its graphics modes, while a huge leap over the old Apple II, still lagged behind what the Amiga could do, and its processor ran slower than either competitor's chip. Early sales were respectable, particularly among existing Apple II households upgrading their systems. But the IIgs never approached the cultural splash the original Apple II or the Macintosh had made at their own debuts. Even without a splashy breakout, the IIgs carved out real strongholds. Schools, already loaded with Apple II hardware and software, adopted the IIgs as a natural upgrade path, and it remained a fixture in American classrooms well into the early 1990s. Musicians and hobbyists took to its Ensoniq sound chip, using programs like Music Construction Set and later Trackers to produce work that rivaled dedicated music hardware of the era. And a small but devoted community of programmers pushed its graphics and sound far past what most commercial software attempted, producing demos that showcased just how much the machine could do in the right hands. Games designed specifically for its capabilities, titles like Zany Golf and later ports that took advantage of its color palette and audio, became showcases handed around at user group meetings. That user base, organized through Apple II user groups and independent GS-specific publications, stayed remarkably loyal, some of it persisting long after Apple itself had moved on. Behind the scenes, evidence suggests Apple deliberately kept the 2GS from reaching its full potential. The 65C8-16 processor was capable of running faster than the 2.8 MHz Apple shipped it at, and later hobbyist upgrades proved the hardware could handle significantly higher speeds. But Apple never raised the clock rate in any official model. Marketing budgets and software development support consistently favored the Macintosh, and former Apple II team members have described a company culture where pushing the 2GS too far, closing the gap with the Mac's graphical experience, was seen as a threat to the Mac's positioning rather than a win for Apple as a whole. Jean-Louis Gasset, who ran product development at Apple during this period, has been quoted describing the need to keep the 2GS from cannibalizing the Macintosh. Whether this was explicit top-down strategy or a more diffuse pattern of resource allocation is debated among former employees, but the outcome was consistent. A technically capable machine that Apple never let compete on equal footing with its own flagship. While Apple managed its internal balancing act, the outside market kept moving. The Amiga in particular built a strong following in video production, gaming, and multimedia through the late 1980s, areas where the 2Gs might have competed had it been pushed harder. Meanwhile, the Macintosh itself became a more direct threat to the 2GS's own audience, as Apple steadily dropped Mac prices and introduced cheaper models like the Macintosh LC in 1990, which even included an Apple II compatibility card, making it possible to run old II software directly on Mac hardware. At the same time, IBM-compatible PCs running Microsoft Windows were expanding rapidly through homes, schools, and offices, offering an ever-growing software library and falling prices of their own. The 2GS found itself squeezed between more powerful multimedia machines on one side and Apple's own increasingly affordable Macintosh line on the other, with shrinking room in between. Through the late 1980s, 2GS updates grew more modest, largely limited to memory and storage improvements rather than any leap in core performance, and third-party software support gradually thinned as developers focused their energy on the Macintosh and the fast-growing Windows PC market. Apple released a final revision of the 2GS in 1989, but no successor followed. By the early 1990s, the writing was clear, and on December 21, 1992, Apple announced it would discontinue the Apple IIgs, with the last units shipping in early 1993. That announcement effectively closed out the entire Apple II line, 16 years after the original Apple II had launched the company into the personal computer business. Today, the Apple IIgs holds a devoted place in retro computing circles, kept alive by enthusiasts who still write new software, build hardware accelerators, and push the machine's original chips well past their intended limits. Decades after Apple stopped supporting it, among historians of the company, it's often discussed as one of Apple's great what-ifs, a computer with genuinely competitive hardware for its moment that never got the corporate backing needed to become something larger. It stands as a reminder that a company's internal priorities can shape a product's fate as much as its engineering does. The Apple IIgs was never allowed to be the future. It was only ever allowed to be a very well-built bridge, and bridges, however elegant, are built to be walked across, not stood upon.